I will say that we're seeing more than ever in my lifetime. Celebrities, public figures are positively owning their sexual identities, kind of in the mainstream media. Um, but not everybody's afforded that privilege and are given such a positive reception coming out. Um, and that's why we know that suicide rates, and I hate to be a downer, but it's true, this the attempted suicide rates by our LGBTQ plus community, um, it is high. It's higher than the heterosexual youth. And that's because of all the angst around coming out.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Foxworth Theory. And I am your host, Eugenia Foxworth. Thank you for joining us. This show is about art, fashion, business, and entertainment. And we will be speaking to people that are movers and shakers from around the world. And we will allow them to tell their stories on the Foxworth Theory. This week, our guest is LGBTQ speaker and educator, Dr. Andrea Hickson-Martin. As an advocate for LGBTQ community, Dr. Hickson-Martin is a sought-after speaker on LGBTQ inclusion. Recently, she was the keynote speaker at the national presentation From Pride to Purpose, hosted by the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity in Communications. The acronym is NAMIC, NAMIC, and has presented to audience such as Harvard University and other institutions. Dr. Hickson-Martin built her career in urban education, spending nearly 2 decades in teaching and administrative roles in Massachusetts. Dr. Hickson-Martin, who is a professor at Bay Path University, has been recognized as and forgive me, Intel Teach to the Future, master teacher, a master teacher with the NASA Living with a STAR program, and is a Green Spoon Teacher of Excellence Award winner. Now, that is more than a mouthful, but first, let us welcome Dr. Hickson-Martin.
Eugenia, thank you so much for having me, and please call me Andrea.
If you so like, I will call you Andrea. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Now, there is so much going on in our world today. So let's begin with your journey in the LGBTQ community. Share your story.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your show and to share my story to your audience. Without getting into too much detail, I would say that I grew up, heteronormative throughout my adolescent and teenage years. Meaning, I did what was status quo. I dated guys, went to the prom, went to parties on the weekend with a mix of guys and girls, what most teenagers do, right? And it really wasn't until my second year of college, I started to realize that I wasn't necessarily comfortable in that role. And so my first experience with another woman was during that second year of college, right? Oftentimes people say college is that time to experiment. For me, it was an opportunity to finally understand why I felt like I was always trying to take this square peg and trying to place it in this round hole, and it just never fit right. So it was during those college years that I started to go to some of the local gay clubs. At this time it was the mid '80s. Okay, AIDS had come out in the early '80s, so that was really prevalent in the gay club scene. But what was interesting about these clubs were that they were often kind of in the back rooms or in the basements of straight clubs. The entrances to these clubs were kind of found off to the side of the building or in the back alleyway. And I learned very quickly that I needed to be careful not to be seen entering those establishments for fear of being found out. And I wasn't out. I wasn't even out to myself yet, for the most part. So I wasn't out with my family. Once inside the club, I kind of felt safe. But at the end of the evening, when it was time to leave, and it was kind of that whole last call, that's when I would notice that more trouble would occur. We were exiting out the side or out the back of these buildings, and your straight patrons were coming out the front of the building, and the two would kind of cross paths on the sidewalks or in the parking lot. And of course, these were clubs, so people had been drinking, and suddenly these individuals had that liquid courage, right, to approach us, and it was scary sometimes getting safely to your car. It was not unusual to be called all sorts of very terrible negative names, spit on, or even worse, people trying to lay hands on you, to start a problem. So, that was some of my earliest experience. And I would say that, after I graduated college was when I finally came out to my mother. I had been out I'd personally been out at school, but I was still able to keep it from my mom. When I came out to my mom, it did not go well. I can still hear her voice. She has since passed. And her initial response to me was, "I no longer have a daughter, and you're dead to me." And she didn't speak to me for over a year. It was a tough time in my life. It was high anxiety for me, but yet it was two ends of the spectrum. I was really anxious and nervous, about losing my mother in that way, but also liberating. I finally was able to kind of live my authentic self. Eventually, my mom came around, and we mended our relationship, but she never fully accepted my sexuality. And I have to say, I was always careful to never show any sort of public display of affection. I would never hold my partner's hand in front of her, because I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But ultimately, I was denying a part of myself, so it came at my own expense.
I greatly appreciate your saying this. I have a few friends. I'm straight, but I have a lot of friends. Growing up in the UK, it was looked at differently than here in the States. So for me, it was no big deal, but I understand through many stories, and I'm glad you're sharing yours. Now, can you share with me your thoughts about today's journey for someone who is in the process of exploring their identity from elementary school to college?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. I'll put it out there. I'm 55 years old, so I'm on the older end of things. I will say that, first of all, coming out to yourself is probably the hardest part of the experience initially. So you have to come out to yourself. And I think that living authentically is that first positive step in your life. And it can take time to get there. You know, I believe it's October 11th is National Coming Out Day. And it's a way of celebrating gay, queer, lesbian courage and visibility. It's a day of empowerment for the LGBTQ community. And it was founded in hopes to kind of combat the negativity that surrounds gayness, and encouraging the LGBTQ plus community to embrace their sexuality. So I would say that coming out happens over a continuum over time, and like it takes a lot of courage. It will be a process that I still am processing over my lifetime. I think that the coming out experience is unique to every individual, and I think there are many factors that play into that their coming out story. It can be the family in which you've grown up in. Are they going to be a family that's accepting, or is it going to be a family, where the reaction that I got from my mom? Where you live is big. I mean, you growing up in the UK wasn't as huge, right, of an issue. It was considered maybe more normal. I hate using the word normal, what that means. It's everybody's own definition. But I think where you live, if you're living in a city, if you're living, in the country, the suburbs, can have an impact on coming out. The state that you live in the United States has a huge impact on individuals from early grade school all the way through college, on how they'll be accepted. The household in which you're growing up in, what are their religious beliefs? Those are all huge factors that play into someone's coming out story. I will say that we're seeing more than ever in my lifetime, celebrities, public figures are positively owning their sexual identities kind of in the mainstream media. But not everybody's afforded that privilege and are given such a positive reception coming out. And that's why we know that suicide rates, and I hate to be a downer, but it's true, the attempted suicide rates by our LGBTQ plus community, it is high. It's higher than the heterosexual youth. And that's because of all the angst around coming out and being your authentic self.
No, I know that. I mean, I have a friend whose parents put him, and he was in Canada, put him out into the streets when he was 13 years old. I mean, there's so many stories. That's why it's so important to me to have you here to share with others. Now, what trends are emerging in
Yeah,
our community that may be troubling the LGBTQ community?
sure.
In our society, I meant to say, in
Yeah,
our society.
okay. First of all, I just want to go back to a statement you made about, someone that you knew that was put out in the streets. It's important that we keep those stories alive, because it still happens, right? We are, as a community, we are not afforded the same rights as a heterosexual community is. And I hope there comes a time where it is widely accepted and there's no need to come out. We're not there yet. My concern is we're almost going backwards, right? And so that kind of segues into your question around the trends that are emerging that are troubling. I think the first trend that comes to mind is the sweeping legislation that's being proposed across many of the United States. We've got Florida recently just passed the controversial parental rights and education bill that was just passed in the last couple of weeks. That's the bill that's being referred to as Don't Say Gay. Basically, what that bill is it's saying that classroom instruction by the school, by personnel within the school, or third parties, any instruction around sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in grades K to 3. That's troubling. So they're controlling the curriculum, and they're saying that schools K to 3 cannot talk about anything that has to do with sexual orientation or gender identity, especially if it's not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students, and according to the state standards. Those standards being set by white heterosexual men of privilege. The supporters of this legislation believe that it is a way to that this bill was a way to prevent schools from indoctrinating youth into becoming gay. That whole if we talk about being gay, then you're going to become gay. Which really is just nonsense. And the governor has come right out and said, that teaching kindergarten age students that they can be whatever they want to be is inappropriate. I mean, that's alarming on so many levels, that a governor is stating something like that. So does that mean that a young brown or Black youth who dreams to be, CEO of a company or president of the United States, we can't, encourage them to be whatever they want to be, that it's inappropriate? That's when you want to start encouraging children to dream, to know that the world is an oyster and they can do with it what they want. There's a project called the Trevor Project, and it's a national survey, and your viewers can look into it. But it shows that as of 2021, 42% of the LGBTQ youth have considered suicide in the past year. Mm-hmm. And that's higher than their cisgender straight peers. So cisgender means someone who identifies the same sex as if they were born, as they were born. So I'm cisgender female. I was born female. I identify as female. So I am cisgender, but I am a lesbian. Based on what you've told me, I'm assuming you're cisgender. You identify as female, but you're also straight. So what we're doing with these types of bills is we're taking away those safe spaces for children to learn how to understand their gender identity. And I think the suicide rates will continue to rise as opposed to drop around this anxiety.
Well, I appreciate this, and I will continue because it's very important for our audience. So let's take a short break, and we will be right back with our very special guest, Dr. Andrea Hickson-Martin. Thank you for joining us on the Foxworth Theory. Be sure to tune in on Thursday at 9 p.m. on the Foxworth Theory Network.